all of these texts where they have to toe a weird line. They need to toe a line, with the exception of the so-called Gnostic literature, for whom dualism is their answer. Monism comes with a problem, right? Monism comes with a problem that clearly evil exists, and you got to do something with it. You have to explain where it comes from and how to defeat it. The world itself is somehow deficient and broken, and the task is to climb out of it. Ancient Alexandria was that you had 15, 20 different groups of people out there in the streets of Alexandria being like, we found it, right? Whether it's the Stoics with their apatheia, whether it's the Way of Hermes, whether it was the various schools of so-called Gnosticism, or it was the various schools of so-called Christianity, the Jews. What a sight it must have been. You talk about the marketplace of ideas, but, it's nothing like it must have been back then. It must have been a positive, this cornucopia of people competing. And can you imagine a world where there's a Hermeticist and a Gnostic and the middle Platonic philosophers looking down their nose at everyone? No one's going to get left out of salvation. Everyone was shopping. And can you imagine being that illiterate shopper? And you can't read these books. You can't read what they said. You're like, have you heard about the Way of Hermes? Have you heard about the Way of Valentinus? Have you heard about the Way of Jesus? Have you heard about the Way of Seth?
Sledge. I just want to re-emphasize that I really do appreciate you taking the time, especially on a show like this that's just getting started out. So,
hey man, look, everybody starts at 0 subscribers. So I distinctly remember looking at my thing and looking at it, and it said 0 subscribers. So, you're a great guy. You're clearly you're doing the hard work of working through this material, and so I'm absolutely want to support you, and also just I think that you're going to be a really great content creator in terms of creating non-clickbaity, really good venues for scholars to discuss. So I want to be on the ground floor of that, man.
Thank you. Like I said, I wanted to talk about Poimandres. Mm-hmm. I just kind of went through it, and so I wanted to touch upon a subject that you know a thing or two about, apocalyptic literature, the Merkaba literature, things like that. But I wanted to look at it from the lens of Hermetic literature, mm-hmm. And just kind of maybe we can't say that it's genetic borrowing, but we can definitely tell that there's something going on there in terms of it's in the ether, so to speak. And I just want to put out a disclaimer for our viewers. When we compare these subjects, we are not saying they're genetic links. I am following Jonathan Z. Smith's axiom that for any kind of comparison to be interesting, we have to posit that there's a difference, and the differences make it interesting. So that's where we're coming from. We're not saying this character is like this dying and rising God or whatever. We're just comparing the text for their own sake. So we're going to talk about Poimandres, Dr. Sledge. So in this text, the character really seems to be kind of almost in a manic state. He's almost like in a altered state of consciousness, like you see in something like in the Gnostic Nag Hammadi literature, like something like Zostrianos. Like they're in this state of almost mania, and then they have this vision of this, of Poimandres, who's basically like a Dr. Manhattan type character, I imagine.
Less frightening, I think, though.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, less frightening. And I think in fact, I think the Corpus Hermeticum either 13 or 11 does use the term mania for the state they're in. So that, I think you're exactly right. That is the in the Corpus Hermeticum is leaning on the old Platonic idea of the mania and the Phaedrus, among other texts. But yeah, I think this is they are in an altered state of consciousness, and I would argue, I think that that Corpus Hermeticum 1 is downstream of someone's. It's downstream of phenomenology, which is to say, this is a text that is I think is the result of someone's mystical experience. Ditto with the Discourse on the Eighth and the Ninth and stuff like that. So I think that a lot of this literature is downstream of phenomenology.
Yeah, one thing I found really interesting about Poimandres is when you compare it with something like On the Origin of the World, Reality of the Rulers, and Nag Hammadi Codex, and the Nag Hammadi Codices, while those texts seem to have a very negative view of all this stuff, like Poimandres is almost like a love story. And I know that Hanegraaff kind of thinks similar. I found out about this actually.
You're absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, the Corpus Hermeticum calls the world the second God, and so, by the world they mean the physical cosmos, right? And as we've mentioned before, the Corpus Hermeticum is a spectrum. Some texts are more dualists, some texts are more monists, but Poimandres is very solidly on the team of the cosmos is the second God, and insofar as it is a second God, derivative of the first unknown God or maybe nous, it is beautiful. It is perfect. It is sublime. This is not, the nightmare that is the hypostasis of the archons or whatever, where the universe is a prison and all this sort of stuff. No, like this is you break through. This is sort of the cosmos moment, a la Carl Sagan, right, where you get to gaze into the beauty of the cosmos, and not only do you get to gaze into the beauty of it, but the beauty of it embraces you. And I think that is. I don't know about you, Jason. I'm so awash in Nag Hammadi. I'm so awash in so much of this sort of world pessimism that exists in a lot of this ancient literature, that when you read Poimandres, it really comes across as positively beautiful, where you poke your head through the veil, and the beauty of the cosmos elevates and embraces you. It's just such a refreshing change of pace compared to, like you said, On the Origin of the World, or or On the Reality of the Rulers. And you're like, oh God, more archons.
Yeah, and I can completely see where I know that it's probably not the most historical thing to do, but I like to read things like when I'm reading it personally as a reader from a more empire critical standpoint. So I can totally understand where On the Origin of the World or Reality of the Rulers are coming from, when they're like, oh, okay, you were a fool, Sockless, you're not the creator of the world. But I just want to contrast that kind of attitude with what you find in Poimandres 114. So I'm just going to read this really quickly. So this is from Poimandres 114. The man broke through the vaults and stooped to look through the cosmic framework. Nature smiled for love when she saw him. In the water, she saw the shape of man's fairest form. When the man saw the water like himself, as it was in nature, he loved it. Nature took hold of her beloved, hugging him all about and embraced him, for they were lovers. That's from the Copenhagen translation. That is just mind-blowing to me. Just like the beauty of that,
It's so great. And also, I love if you read some of the early alchemical literature, also produced in the Alexandrian context, one of my favorite writers is Pseudo-Democritus, and his favorite refrain is always "Nature rejoices in nature," which tells me actually that I think a lot of these early Hermeticists, there's a reason why alchemy and Hermeticism got linked together. I think that we could go into this more, but I think that there actually there's a genetic relationship there. And I think the fact that the deep interest in the technical Hermetica in alchemy is only possible because of the deep philosophical love of nature. Because if you fundamentally hate nature, and if nature is fundamentally bad, and nature, all of this is evil, then you only want to get out of it. You don't want to tinker around with it to understand it better, to learn to rejoice in it. Nature rejoices in nature. And I really love not only the deep sublimity of Poimandres in the Hermeticum when it comes to their love of the physical world, their love of being embodied at some level, but also the uptake of that in the physicalism of learning to tinker with it in terms of alchemy. And so I think those two things are very close. I think they're actually genetically related, and I have a it just makes me very happy in a way that I've never personally understood the interest in Gnosticism, but I really do at some level dig Hermeticism, um, precisely because of that, right? That beautiful view of physical reality and not the diminishing of it. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. And yeah, we can definitely talk further about
Mhm.
these alchemical things. That's definitely your area. I'm not as well
Mhm.
versed in alchemy at all. That's why I go to your videos. I'm like, oh, he knows
Mhm.
so much about all this stuff, and it's just so awesome. I used to read a lot of Crowley and Dion Fortune and all that stuff when I was in college, and um, apparently after I left, like you said, there was a explosion in quote unquote respectability for this stuff. So
Mhm.
that's definitely exciting for me. And I'm definitely enjoying all the um, scholarship resources that I do get from your channel and your Patreon. So thank you for that.
Of course.
So just a couple more questions. Just kind of, we talked about the more positive aspects of Poimandres. Let's kind of circle back to the adjacent Jewish apocalyptic elements
Mhm.
that you find in the pseudepigraphical literature. Second Enoch was a really big parallel I kind of saw because you have this concept in the Poimandres of casting off the vices
Mhm.
and the spheres, and you kind of find the same thing in something like Second Enoch with when he's talking about like the sun and the moon and all the different deities. I can't remember what chapter it was, but and then something in Testament of Solomon where he's talking to the seven demons,
Right.
and it's just is this something that's just common coin at the time, or is it some kind of more conscious borrowing in the Hermetica?
It's so hard to say, right? That what's the what's the cultural milieu and what's the genetic borrowing? It's impossible to draw these lines. It seems to me that there is some sense in all of these texts where they have to toe a weird line. They need to toe a line, with the exception of the so-called Gnostic literature, for whom dualism is their answer, and that's not true of all so-called Gnostics either. Um, Monism comes with a problem, right? Monism comes with a problem that clearly evil exists. Clearly evil exists, and you got to do something with it. You have to explain where it comes from and how to defeat it. And I think that the way that a lot of non-dualists deal with it is by positing that there is some kind of minor cosmic tragedy that is overcomable, and that minor cosmic tragedy is at some of a link with the structure of reality, and one has to pass out of the structure of physical reality to ultimately undo it. And so that's true of lots of texts. It's true of the Merkava literature. That's true of so-called Gnostic literature. It's true of the Corpus Hermeticum. You see it in Second Enoch. Um, Even the Ascension of Isaiah, right, where he has to go down and go up. Um, so what they do, right, is they basically say that the world itself is somehow deficient and broken, and the task is to climb out of it, um, or at least the broken aspects of it. So it seems like this was just a way of answering the question where you have a relatively omnipotent God, which is true of lots of these traditions, most of them that aren't radically dualist. And the way that you fix it is saying, well, there's a radically perfect God that created a, a that from which an imperfect universe emerged, and the task is to ultimately ascend out of that imperfection. And then there's a shade of how imperfect it is, right? From Plotinus, where matter is just basically the last bits of reality tattering off into the void. Always imagine like the end of your uh, genes tattering off into the dirt and stuff as they weather out. I always like that image of Plotinus's vision of matter, or whatever image. But for whatever reason, in the Corpus Hermeticum, right, is the idea that you have these daimons that actually penetrate into your soul that are stuck in you, and you have to basically be exorcised of them, and then you can, ascend into the Ogdoad, the Ennead, and maybe beyond. So they all have some flavor of that, and some of them even have more radical versions. In Third Enoch, right, where you can be transformed into an angel, and maybe even in Paul, where you can be transformed in some kind of way. You ascend and become transformed. So I think all of them have some version of that, because they have to square a very simple problem. If there's just the one, how do we get to plurality, and why is that plurality bad? And you can see it in the Neoplatonian theory of procession and recession. You can see it in the Christian theory of salvation. You can see it in the Hermetic version of ascending through the spheres up to the Ogdoad and Ennead. They all have some version of that. And I think that it's not because they're borrowing from each other so much, is that they have a shared philosophical problem, and they offer different solutions for that philosophical problem. And by the way, you still see that being worked itself out in the Middle Ages. The Kabbalah assumes a basically Neoplatonian framework. And even in the 13th century, it's shocking how similar the Kabbalistic answer is in the 1280s in the Zohar that you see in literature of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries of the Common Era. And it's not because they're influencing each other. It's because once you assume a certain logic, only other certain kinds of logics are going to get you out of it. And you don't have to, there doesn't have to be some kind of like red thread of Gnosticism, needled all the way through the this and that and the Cathars and all this. You just assume certain kinds of problems, and you're going to only have a certain kind of solution set, and that solution set's going to look pretty similar. And unsurprisingly, they look pretty similar, all things told.
Well said. Well said. So our final question, kind of getting away from the muck of creation and the existential questions that all these people have while creating an identity. I wanted to end on a more positive note, just talking about, Poimandres, at the end, starting in Poimandres 126, he's kind of returning from his, ascent, and he's coming down, and, similar to something like Zostrianos and, Nag Hammadi Codex, 8, 1, they both have this mission, but you could tell with Poimandres, as opposed to Zostrianos, it almost feels kind of more elitist to me, versus with Poimandres, it's a very lush kind of exhortation to his fellow man, to save yourself, and I don't know, I was just wondering your thoughts on that.
I think this idea of, it's comparable maybe to the Bodhisattvas or something of the Eastern traditions, where, and this goes back to Plato, right? When people forget that the allegory of the cave is a dialectical story. The person in the cave leaves, sees the truth, and comes back, right? In the allegory of the cave, the guy comes back to the people in the cave. That image, I think, made an indelible impression upon many, many people. And so Poimandres, and it's a pity that the text you mentioned, right? It's so fragmentary that it's hard to piece together all that's going on there. I think it's the longest text in Nag Hammadi, actually, Zostrianos. Yeah, I think the idea is that if you find the truth, and the truth really provides salvation for you, you can't keep it hidden. You reveal it. You try to use it to save people. And yeah, the Zostrianos text does strike me as a little more elitist, but it's not like Poimandres is like kind to people. He calls them like drunkards and sleepwalkers, and he's not exactly like easy on them as it goes. But yeah, I mean, same with Jesus and other kinds of these characters. The idea, right, is that they discover some truth, and they try to save us with it. At some level, I guess, I like that story so much more than I found the truth, and now let me initiate the tiny elect few who will be worthy of the message. And this is a thing about esotericism that I really dislike, is the elitism that comes with it. That that I found the message, and now let me do the work of it, of initiating the tiny few of people that are worthy of the message, or whatever. I like Poimandres in this way, because Poimandres, Plato too, right? He comes back to the cave is all of us. We're all in the cave. He comes back to all of us. Zostrianos too, to some degree, although it's a little more elect based. But I think that the idea of when you find a breakthrough truth or spiritual truth or whatever, to share it. You can't hide a light in a bushel. And I like the idea of getting it out there. And I do think that that's what I like about at least my romantic view of ancient Alexandria, was that you had 15, 20 different groups of people out there in the streets of Alexandria being like, we found it, right? Whether it's the Stoics with their apatheia, whether it's the way of Hermes, whether it was the various schools of so-called Gnosticism, or it was the various schools of so-called Christianity, the Jews, all these different groups. What a sight it must have been. We talk about the market. We talk about the marketplace of ideas, but it's nothing like it must have been back then. It must have been a positive, this cornucopia of people competing. And can you imagine a world where there's a Hermeticist and a Gnostic and the middle Platonic philosophers looking down their nose at everyone? And it must have just been for the hoi polloi, for the illiterate masses, which most people were. It must have been because they were shopping, right? Everyone was shopping. Everyone was shopping. No one's going to get left out of salvation. Everyone was shopping. And can you imagine being that illiterate shopper? And you can't read these books. You can't read what they said, and to have to go to the marketplace and be like, have you heard about the way of Hermes? Have you heard about the way of Valentinus? Have you heard about the way of Jesus? Have you heard about the way of Seth? Man, it must have been an exciting time, but also fraught. I mean, I'd hate to have made so many decisions, but yeah, I think that you can you can esotericize your way out of a job, which is what I don't want to do. You can esoteric. I mean, if your truth that you discovered is so secret and so powerful and so special that only you and 3 of your friends will ever be worthy of learning about it, probably you're going to esotericize your way out of a job. And I do like Zostrianos and Poimandres, where they take these extreme revelations and they say, no, we're going to put them out there and we're going to see who bites. We're going to see who believes it. We're going to see if they want to join our group or community or what have you. And I find that to be just like a terribly fascinating glimpse into the world that must have been the frothing milk of ancient Alexandrian intellectual and spiritual life.
Well said. I couldn't say it better myself. Yeah, I mean, and that brings up an amazing point. You can't really imagine like those Neoplatonic philosophers and like say Eunapius. Like you're not going to imagine like Ammonius Saccas like in the Agora, like shouting out his ideas of to the whole marketplace. He's more like with his own. Circle.
Oh right, Ammonius Saccas is by himself with his own circle, perhaps, but I'm sure Ammonius Saccas had his hype man.
Yeah,
everybody has to have a hype man, and so Ammonius Saccas had his guy out, being like, "Have you heard about Ammonius Saccas?" And he knows the thing, and of course, Plotinus.
Plotinus, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Plotinus, and maybe even did Origen study under Ammonius Saccas?
I can't remember who exactly he studied under. I know he did study under one of those guys.
But you don't learn.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but again, like everyone has a hype man, and so I think that again, whoever wrote the Corpus Hermetica may have not been the hype man, but I'm sure they had some guy, hawking. I always think of like Marxists, all the schools of Marxism, all hawking papers. I imagine it was you read this, out there reading in Corpus Hermeticum 1.
Yeah, I like the analogy Dylan Burns tells about. He has this analogy where the way the Sethian literature kind of transmitted. It was kind of like those the Satanic Panic. Just getting it back to your channel. Like it's like, hey, have you heard the true story about Genesis? Have you read this really hot new deep cut called the Apocryphon of John or whatever?
Yeah,
It's
Apocryphon
the
of
same
John.
thing.
Yeah,
It's like a trying to like get Slayer records and sneaking them into your room or something. But Dr. Sledge, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
of course, man.
Where can people find you?
Yeah, man. They can find me mostly on YouTube. I don't have a lot of other social media because it scares the hell out of me. But I'm on YouTube under Esoterica. That's sort of my bag, and folks can also find me on my Patreon and support the work I try to do of providing. Again, I'm trying not to esotericize myself out of a job, despite the name of my channel. It's all about trying to make Esoterica accessible in a way that's scholarly and rigorous and fun. I also try to have fun with this stuff. So folks can find me there.
Well, Justin Sledge, it's been a pleasure. Take care.
Of course, man. Thank you.